This is probably my most hated task of this method of charcoal drawing, which is trying to blend these two mediums together in a way that looks nice. It's definitely not very easy, especially when you're trying to control a straight line at the same time. Try to keep it horizontal. I think that helped a little bit, and then we can perhaps see a little bit better where we want to place this. Weird little, I guess, placeholder mark over here that's distracting a little bit, so let's get rid of it. Push this mark a little bit lower. With this highlight, we definitely don't want to make it super light. Just light enough to read as a highlight. We don't have to make it absolutely even either. At this stage, when we're sort of drawing it in, we can always push things back and forth with the charcoal. And that's probably the best way to do it. It's not, you know, pulling something straight across with the ruler. It's working it little by little. If you pull it straight across with a ruler, you might think you're saving yourself a lot of trouble, but you would have to sort of work it area by area anyways afterwards, in order to preserve some of that sort of, I don't know, I guess, organic mark making that charcoal needs. The softness and all this kind of stuff that is sort of an end result of just manipulating it little by little. I also want to have this line gradate from the light source towards the left side, this side being a little bit darker than this side as well. That sort of creates variety, and also it's another hint telling us that the light source is coming from that side, and that's how it would work in real life. On this print it looks fairly even. Maybe this right edge is the most bright area, and it sort of does fade towards the left side, but it's subtle. I think it's worth saying that that's something that you can see happening in many cases where you have this kind of sort of corner plane, let's call it. I think the same goes for this bottom plane over here. We want to have it slightly lighter on this side as well. It's also probably going to be fairly subtle, and we still want the bottom edge over here to be very soft against this darkest tone over here, because that way we can achieve a little bit more of the atmosphere, I want to say. Up till now I used the soft stick. Now I'll move to the HB stick so I can control it a little bit better. I think before we mess with the sort of final result of this top edge, we want to start placing this reflected light, or reflection, sorry, over on this table. I think we just want to remove stuff at first. Sort of comes around over here. This kind of reflection is always also the most intense next to the source of the reflection, so you know this area should be probably the brightest we're seeing, because of course it's right next to the skull, and everything else, the light sort of diminishes with distance. I don't think any edge of this reflection should be at all sharp. Since there are no sharp edges, there's a little bit of firmness over on this side, but I think those edges are going to be, you know, thing to be addressed during the rendering stage. This reflection is basically the only thing we have that is, well, along with the highlight, that is describing the texture of this table that the skull is on. Or sorry, that the plaster cast of the skull is on. Perhaps we can even pull something further out with this stump, the side of the stump that is. So we can pull out a little bit more near the skull and have a bit of gradation happening. So I'm sort of rotating to a cleaner edge as I'm pulling, so we can remove more with one pass. This edge is not going to be as light as this part, because the portion that is reflecting from it, which is the back of the skull over here, it's not as close to the table, or the sort of area where we're seeing the reflection on the table, so we can leave it a little bit lighter. I think this is pretty good, and then we can go in and start softening with this. I want things to remain soft and sort of somewhat subtle. Perhaps on this side we can use the other side of the brush for these darker tones. So as you can probably tell, this is a far more pleasing way to make this reflection happen at this stage, rather than sort of trying to retain this area free of charcoal during the sort of blocking in of the dark stage. It's very easy to pull out. We can use the tools. We can, you know, have a bit of fun doing that if we want to. It's just very loose sort of application of the brush. We don't have to copy this reflection extremely accurately. We can just have it be, you know, believable for this skull. We don't have to. This is not the sort of main star of this project, naturally, so we don't care too much if it's, you know, bang on or not, and have a bit of relief from the accuracy side of things. And there's this sort of darker tone on the between the reflection and the highlight. There is a little bit of dark tone. I think it conveys us the sort of changing plane before we reach the plane that is giving us the highlight. There's a little bit of turning plane that isn't reflecting highlight, or the skull, which is probably, you know, a plane that is sort of facing right upwards, not towards the light source or the skull. So we can put that in, and that should help convince the viewer of the realism. So yeah, let's pull this highlight out a little bit more on this side of things. So as you can see, this is a back and forth kind of process as well, as with all things with charcoal. Generally, you're gonna have to make some passes over each thing. Generally, you might also see a sort of darker line beneath the highlight as well. That's also due to the plane changes, but just having a little bit of darkness below the highlight also helps pop it more, and also describes us, you know, gives us a description that there's more than one tone intentionally happening in this tabletop area. So as I'm doing this, I'm just trying to push things towards a straighter line all the time with this highlight. Even if this edge isn't really like appearing like a highlight anymore, squinting it reads as a separate plane. That's the main thing. Just gonna step back a little and see if it's actually feeling. It does feel quite horizontal right now. Perhaps we can slightly elevate this left side. I'm talking very slightly. Yeah, it's looking a lot better with that slight nudge. We're talking things like straightening a line out. It's definitely small things you need to change. No major changes, and no, you know, starting over or anything like that. You can always just nudge things, check, and usually that would definitely pull you towards the right direction. I think there's a little bit of gradation happening now. Just ever so slightly raise the average value of this side as well. And I think we're getting close to having a nice gradation on this highlight. There's some small lighter dots that are over there, but those are, you know, for rendering stage, where we can, you know, dot pick this a little to a cleaner state. Yeah, so some things we still wanna, you know, work on. The tabletop gradation, slightly work that, as well as the background. But before that, we'll be taking a break. So we want to look at the background. We established we want to have this as the darkest area of the background. But yeah, I guess we could leave this part as the darkest. Doesn't really change much in terms of let's say the feeling of depth, but we can also lighten it slightly so it's not as dark as whatever the darkest accents on the skull will be. So we can have these things pop a little bit more than the background. So what I'm doing here is I'm just putting on the HB charcoal, and you can see it's slightly lightening the darkest area. And that's because there's a little bit of excess charcoal dust on there. Now I'm sort of just wiping it off. So I think we can now re-establish the sort of back edge of this table. It's a bit tricky. The HB is slightly removing the charcoal. I think we're pretty close to being as dark as we can over on this side. So I guess this sort of tonal range is a bit tricky to navigate because with the charcoal sticks you can't really be certain if it's going to be lighter or darker after you apply it. My handling isn't perfect either because it's been what I worked on my charcoal project in school like this in the spring of 22, so it's been 4 years. Okay, I think this is looking pretty good. Towards the front we can be slightly lighter, but we don't want to make it too much. We also want to make these darkest moments a little bit soft, but perhaps we can go for the overall impression before we decide what tone we want to use for that. I think the main reason we want to work this background and tabletop as much as we do is that we want to have it sort of recede and appear soft, but you know, firm, if that sort of tells you anything. Meaning that it feels real, but it doesn't really take the center light, you know, from the cast itself. These are supporting actors we're doing here. So we want to have those do their job, meaning support the overall image, but we don't want to have them, you know, too you know, emphasized, I want to say. Something that can sometimes happen next to this Rembrandt stuff that is, I think, the most annoying, which is something that's, I think, happening a little bit right now, is that a little bit of that sort of waxy binder stuff that can be annoying to work with. It can sort of stick to the paper a little bit and it won't hold as much charcoal, and you might end up with something that looks very light at the edge of that black stuff. And yeah, that's a bit of a problem because you want to have a soft gradation, not the light line surrounding all these darker things. So I think what we need to do is push it out a little bit. To manage that gradation, but yeah, that's why we have to be very careful with the Rembrandt. Honestly, I'm not sure if this is like the best medium for beginners to use, you know, adding this on top of the charcoal, because it's another other sort of challenge to tackle while you're still learning the charcoal. So perhaps it's not the best, but I wanted to show you how to use it. And as I said, you know, previously, you can always try something else as well. It doesn't have to be specifically, you know, this Rembrandt Rembrandt soft pastel that you would use for this, but it could be something like the Conte pencils or something of the sort that sort of has a bit of binder, meaning it goes a little bit darker than charcoal itself. And that way you can, you know, push the value range a little bit more. You can give that drawing a little bit more pop. But yeah, here we're just trying to soften these edges of the penumbra here. What I'm doing here is I switched to this H hardness of charcoal, and this is so hard already that it can sort of start scraping away the charcoal very lightly. So this is a way where you can sort of lighten these dark things a little bit, and this is, you know, way more delicate than anything else that you can really do to a charcoal drawing to lighten things up. kind of hatching this lighter tone in here, we could even say. And maybe you can see sort of here, it doesn't really, I'm using a very sort of hard edge of the charcoal, as I sometime before I mentioned that these charcoal sticks have these harder points and softer points, and you sort of work through them. A harder point is good in this case because it just sort of moves around the charcoal that is already on the paper. Not really bringing anything else to add to it. You could, I guess you could do this with a wooden skewer or something as well. That's definitely hard, and that's definitely not gonna add any more charcoal to the picture. But yeah, you can in a way sort of use this to blend darker stuff as well. So I think we have a distinct difference now between these two areas. I think the lightest area being this front of the table. This is still a black table, but we want to have some kind of difference between these areas. Also want to have this kind of very smooth during the variation stage, because the very last thing we'll be doing is rendering the background. And if you leave everything super grainy and annoying at that point, it'll be a bit of a pain to just spend some days, rendering what is effectively just black. It's not really fun to do that. So one strategy, of course, is to make it as nice as you can at this stage. You're sort of taking a little bit of the work already that's in the future and taking care of it now when it doesn't feel too bad. And the other thing is, of course, then you can start working on certain areas of the background a little bit before you sort of should be moving to that, which makes it, a bit more manageable if you have some chunks, already rendered out before you finish the skull. You do like, I don't know, 30 minutes to an hour of the background, and then, 2 hours of the skull when you're rendering. So you're sort of tackling it evenly and progressing the background little by little as well. Rendering the background isn't really extremely necessary for a nice, end result for you to look at, but I think it's a great exercise, so I would recommend you do it. It really pushes your eye to see every single imperfection in a flat tone, and I think it's just one of the things you should do if you want really to hone your eye. There's other ways to get to that place, of course, but in our school it was like that, and this is effectively the technique I learned in school. I think the figure drawing I'll be making for this course in charcoal, I will not be using this same method, strictly speaking. I think I'll more like apply what I know and show you a sort of alternate way to approach things. Working on the outline always usually results in some kind of darker marks around in the background sort of area around the subject. So one good way to work at it is use this hard charcoal that we've been using on the background already, and you can sort of lighten those slightly, break those apart sort of, so you don't have these dark outlines around the skull in areas where you don't really want them. Sometimes outlines can be nice, but if they're not intentional outlines, I would avoid them. Doing this reveals a bit of texture. I don't really mind paper texture that much. It's okay. What I have revealed to myself is there's a little bit of this light stuff up here that's not supposed to be there. Just work it through and keep hatching away sort of the darkness. I think we're arriving at a better gradation than what we started with, and that's great. I'm going to push the gradation a little bit towards the bottom here. Also using pressure and sort of insisting on an area to sort of apply the charcoal more. Whereas very light pressure is sort of sweeping away the charcoal dust on the surface, not really applying the charcoal so much, and always moving, sort of you can wipe away some of the tone instead of applying. If you just stick to one area, you will usually just start adding charcoal at some point. And yeah, working in the background is one of the most boring things, but I think it's also kind of rewarding to see how nice it can become with a little bit of extra effort. One reason why I'm working the background a bit more now is because I don't really intend to spend all the time rendering the background. I'm gonna leave it fairly close to this, but I will show you how to approach this rendering of the background when we get to that point. Effectively, you just dot pick an area and you try to match the overall tone, but you have to maintain the gradations as well. It's not very thrilling, I want to say. I'm not very interested in maintaining these strict lines that we're seeing on the tabletop in the back. All we want to do is sort of maintain the value areas, which sort of gives us the impression that we're looking at two separate things, a tabletop as well as a plane in the background receding. Yeah, I think we're more or less done with the variations of the darks now, and the next thing will be the planes of lights. But now let's take a break and have a final look before we call this stage and then start approaching the finishing of this drawing. Took another look at this, and I think definitely we need to maybe work on this area a little bit more before we hop over into the planes of light stage. I sort of can admit that I pretty much just ignored this whole area till now, so I'm gonna put in some stuff in here at least. With that said, we are only working this shadow area for now. the following refinement will come with the plane stage. I think even if it's very subtle, we still need to have some kind of bedbug line for this shadow area. So let's just create one. Either we have that or we don't have form. Basically, that's the deal. Every form shadow has a terminator or bedbug line. And already it's looking a little bit better. But perhaps we can slightly refine these areas that we're seeing. It's not just a line that's going through that shadow, but there's, you know, varying thicknesses to describe forms and all that good stuff. So yeah, I don't think this shadow has, you know, a whole lot more to work on. Perhaps here we can push the dark a little bit. This is a very dark area, and there's this little nook over here, just placing things that we can see. And perhaps we can slightly darken some things over here where there's sort of a form shadow happening, but I guess that's a cast shadow. I think I actually made a little mistake here, just not really pushing the drawing into the right direction. Again, making mistakes is a part of the process. Just try not to let them sort of overwhelm you. Just go in and nudge things back and then carry on.